She had always loved the piano. Even as a child, she would sit for hours in the corner of her small living room, her tiny fingers pressing the keys carefully, trying to make something beautiful come out. It wasn't about fame or attention for her. It was about the sound, the feeling that came from music. The notes made her heart feel light, like she was floating on a cloud. Her family noticed, but they were too busy with their own lives to pay much attention. Still, she never stopped. She practiced every day, sometimes waking before anyone else in the house just to play for a few quiet moments. At school, she wasn't the kind of kid who stood out in class. She was quiet, often keeping to herself. People didn't know much about her, except that she always seemed calm, almost distant, as if she lived in her own little world. But whenever she got a chance to perform, whether for a school assembly or just for a few friends, everyone would stop and watch. There was something about the way she played, something raw and honest that pulled people in. You didn't need to know her to feel the music. It was as if she could tell a story without words, only through the touch of her fingers on the keys. Her home wasn't fancy, and the piano she had wasn't new. In fact, it was old, scratched, and a little out of tune. But that never mattered. She treated it like it was the most important thing in the world. She would polish the keys, dust off the strings, and sometimes just sit in front of it, staring, as if thinking about the songs that were still inside her. Music wasn't just something she did. It was part of who she was. Every note, every chord, felt like a piece of herself coming out into the world. One afternoon, her mother came into the room while she was practicing. She didn't say anything at first, just watched. Then she spoke softly. "You know, people might notice someday." The girl paused, her hands hovering over the keys. She didn't look up. "I don't care," she said simply. Her mother smiled a little, not because she fully understood, but because she knew her daughter meant it. There was a fire in her, a determination that wasn't easy to explain. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about being true to herself. Her school had a small auditorium, and one day, there was an announcement about a talent show. Many students groaned, saying it wasn't worth their time. Others whispered about who would win and who would fail. She thought about it quietly, weighing the idea. She wasn't the type to seek the spotlight, but something inside told her this might be a chance to show what she had been holding inside all these years. Maybe it was time. The next day, she signed up. Few people noticed her name on the list, and that was exactly how she wanted it. In the weeks leading up to the show, she practiced more than ever. She stayed late after school, sometimes alone in the auditorium, sometimes in her room. Her hands grew sore, her fingers raw, but she didn't stop. Music became her companion, her refuge. When she played, everything else faded away. The teasing from classmates, the chaos of life, even the worries that sometimes kept her awake at night. It was just her and the piano, a private world that no one could touch. The day of the talent show arrived faster than she expected. Backstage, the other participants were loud, joking, and clearly nervous in their own ways. She stayed quiet, sitting with her hands folded, listening to the other acts. Some were singing, some were dancing, some told jokes that made the crowd laugh. She felt a small pang of doubt. What if they didn't like her music? What if they thought she was strange for sitting silently, just to play an old piano? But the feeling passed quickly. She remembered all those hours she had spent alone with the piano, all the nights when she had pressed the keys until her fingers ached. That was enough. She didn't need anyone's approval. She just needed to play. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage quietly. The bright lights made her squint for a moment, but she kept her focus on the piano waiting in the center. The audience was full of students, teachers, and parents. There was a low murmur as she sat down, adjusted the bench, and put her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began. The first notes were soft, delicate, almost hesitant. Then, as she found her rhythm, the music grew. It wasn't fast or complicated. It was simple, honest, full of feeling. Each chord seemed to speak directly to the people listening, telling a story of hope, sadness, joy, and longing. By the time she finished, the auditorium was silent. Nobody had expected this. Nobody had realized that something so small and quiet could carry so much emotion. A few moments later, the applause started, growing louder and louder. She looked up, slightly surprised, a small smile forming on her lips. For the first time, she felt the weight of what she had shared. Music had become a bridge, connecting her heart to everyone else in the room. After the show, people came up to her. Some were teachers, some were classmates, and some were parents who had been curious. Everyone wanted to tell her how beautiful her performance had been. She smiled politely, thanked them quietly, and moved on. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, but she didn't mind it. It wasn't about praise. It was about the feeling she had given to others. That was enough. That night at home, she sat at her piano once more. She replayed the song she had performed, but this time, she added small touches of her own, letting the music flow freely. She thought about the faces in the auditorium, the quiet gasps, the wide eyes, and the smiles. It felt strange to know that her music had reached so many people. Yet she felt the same calm inside her, the same quiet joy that had always been there. Music wasn't about recognition. It was about expression. That night, she played not for anyone else, but for herself. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the talent show lingered. Some students still whispered about her performance. Some teachers complimented her when they saw her in the hall. But mostly, she returned to her normal life, practicing in her room, learning new songs, and creating small melodies that no one would hear. She didn't mind. Music had become a habit, a part of her daily life. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was steady, constant, a friend that would never leave her. One afternoon, a new student joined her school. He was older, dressed sharply, with an air that suggested he was used to attention. He walked through the halls with confidence, observing everything around him carefully. He was different from anyone she had ever met, but she didn't notice him at first. She was sitting quietly at a corner of the library, sketching a few notes for a new song. Music, again, was her focus, but fate had a way of intervening. The principal made an announcement about a small charity event that the school was organizing. They needed someone to perform, and the new student, surprisingly, suggested that she should play. The entire room turned to look at her, but she just blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. She didn't know much about this student, but he seemed sincere. It wasn't a demand. It was a suggestion. She hesitated, thinking about the last performance, thinking about the piano waiting for her at home, thinking about all the hours she had spent perfecting her skills. Finally, she nodded. Yes, she would play. Preparation for this event became different from anything she had done before. There were more people involved, more expectations, and a sense of responsibility she hadn't felt before. But she didn't panic. She practiced every day, sometimes with small breaks, sometimes losing herself entirely in the music. Each note, each melody, became sharper, more expressive. She wasn't just playing a song anymore. She was telling a story to a crowd she didn't know personally. It was both terrifying and thrilling. When the day of the event arrived, she felt a strange mix of excitement and nerves. The auditorium was larger than the school's talent show, filled with parents, teachers, and students from other schools. She took her place at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys. A hush fell over the audience. Then, as she played, the first few notes carried across the hall. People leaned forward, drawn in by the purity of the sound. The music was gentle yet powerful, emotional yet simple. It moved through the room, touching hearts in a way words never could. By the end of her performance, there wasn't just applause. There were tears, soft gasps, and faces reflecting awe. The new student approached her afterward, eyes wide. He hadn't expected anything so profound. He simply said, "I didn't know it could feel like that." She smiled softly, grateful but quiet. It was never about impressing someone. It was about sharing a piece of herself, and now she realized that music had a power she had only begun to understand. That night, she went home and sat at her piano once more. The event had shown her that her music could reach others in ways she hadn't imagined. Yet she still played for herself first, for the comfort and joy it brought her. The piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a companion, a friend, and a voice that spoke even when she could not. She understood now that her journey with music was just beginning, and that the world might someday hear the story she had been holding inside all along. The days after the charity event passed quickly, but the memory of the audience's reaction stayed with her. She couldn't forget the way people had looked at her while she played, the surprise and awe in their eyes, and the quiet moments when even the loudest voices seemed to disappear as the music filled the room. She realized that her music had a kind of magic, not the flashy kind people see on stage, but the kind that could reach someone's heart without a word being spoken. It made her feel powerful, yet calm at the same time. Her routine returned to its usual rhythm. She went to school, finished her classes, and returned home to practice. But something had changed inside her. She no longer played only for herself. She played knowing that people could feel what she felt. Sometimes, she would look out of the window while playing, imagining faces in the audience, imagining someone smiling or even shedding a quiet tear because of the song she created. That thought both encouraged and frightened her. It was a big responsibility, she realized, to have music affect someone so deeply. One afternoon, as she was practicing a new song, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated before picking it up. "Hello?" she said softly. On the other side, a voice spoke quickly, with a tone that suggested urgency. "Hello. This is the event organizer from the charity performance. We were very impressed with your piano performance. There's an opportunity for you to play at a professional gathering this weekend. It's small but important. Would you be interested?" She paused, staring at the phone. A professional gathering? That sounded different, serious, and a little intimidating. She had played at school events, small charity events, and even for her friends and family, but this felt like a step into a world she didn't know. Still, something inside her stirred. She felt a thrill at the idea, a spark that whispered, "You can do this." "Yes," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll do it." The next few days were filled with preparation. This time, it wasn't just about playing notes correctly. She thought about her audience, about the atmosphere, about the feeling she wanted to leave behind. She practiced tirelessly, repeating the song again and again until it felt as natural as breathing. Sometimes she would play slowly, listening to each note, letting it settle in her mind. Other times, she would play with energy, feeling the rhythm as if it were part of her body. Each session felt like a journey. On the day of the professional gathering, she arrived early. The room was different from the school auditorium. It was large, filled with polished floors, sparkling lights, and rows of chairs that seemed to stretch endlessly. People were already gathering, talking quietly, dressed in neat clothes. Some carried briefcases, some had cameras, and some simply stood, chatting and observing. She felt small for a moment, standing with her bag in hand, wondering if she belonged. But then she remembered the hours she had spent practicing, the quiet moments with the piano, the songs she had written from her heart. That memory gave her courage. When it was time to perform, she walked to the piano. The room quieted immediately. She felt a wave of nervousness, her heart beating faster than usual. But as soon as her fingers touched the keys, it was as if everything else faded away. The lights, the audience, the polished floor, all of it disappeared. There was only the piano and the music flowing through her. The first notes were soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. But as she continued, the song grew, carrying emotion that no words could express. People listened intently. She could see their faces, even from a distance, and notice small reactions. Someone's eyes widening, someone leaning forward, someone tapping a finger quietly to the rhythm. The song was not complicated, but it was honest. Every chord, every pause told a story. By the time she reached the last note, there was a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped. Then, slowly, applause began. At first soft, then louder, growing until the entire room echoed with claps and cheers. She looked up, smiling faintly, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced before. After the performance, people approached her. Some wanted to shake her hand, some wanted to ask questions, some simply wanted to say, "That was incredible." She answered politely with her usual quiet demeanor, grateful for the words but not seeking attention. Among the crowd, one man stood out. He was older, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He didn't speak at first, only watched her. Then he approached, leaning slightly on a cane, and said softly, "Your music has a rare gift. It moves people in ways they do not expect. You have something special." She felt a flush of pride mixed with shyness. Compliments were not something she had often received. After the gathering, she returned home, tired but happy. She sat at her piano again, thinking about the day. Something had shifted. She understood now that her music could reach strangers, touch lives she would never meet, and leave an impact far beyond her small room at home. She didn't play for recognition or money. She played because it was part of her, part of who she was. But now she also realized that sharing it with the world could create moments of connection, moments that mattered. Days later, school returned to its usual pace. Classes, homework, and quiet afternoons at the piano became routine again. But whispers and comments from classmates hinted that word had spread. People talked about her performance, about the charity event, about the professional gathering. Some were impressed, some were curious, and a few were envious. She didn't let it affect her. She stayed focused on the music, the songs she wanted to create, and the feeling she wanted to share. That was always more important than anything else. One afternoon, a small package arrived at her home. It was from the organizer of the professional event. Inside was a letter and a small book of sheet music. The letter praised her performance and invited her to participate in another event, one that would gather musicians from all over the city. The sheet music was of a complex song, one she had never seen before, with notes that stretched across the page. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The music was beautiful, challenging, and demanding. But she didn't hesitate. She opened the piano and began to practice, letting the new melody guide her fingers. Weeks went by as she learned the new song. Her fingers sometimes stumbled, her wrists ached, and she occasionally felt frustrated. But each time, she reminded herself of the feeling she got when she played for an audience, the way music could touch hearts. That thought kept her going. Slowly, the song became hers. She added small touches, adjusted the tempo, and let the melody flow naturally. It was no longer just a piece on paper. It was alive, breathing through her fingers. The day of the city event arrived. She arrived early again, feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. The hall was enormous, filled with musicians tuning their instruments, organizers rushing about, and audience members finding their seats. She took a deep breath and walked to the piano. As she sat, she felt the familiar calm wash over her. The room faded, the crowd disappeared, and the piano became her world. She played, letting every note speak, every chord convey emotion. The song was challenging, but she felt confident. Each pause, each accent was deliberate, carrying the meaning she wanted to express. People watched, captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music fill them. Some leaned forward, holding their breath, caught in the story the girl was telling. Others whispered softly, amazed at the skill and emotion she displayed. She didn't play for applause or recognition. She played because the music demanded it, because the song had a story, and she was the only one who could tell it in that moment. When the last note faded, the audience erupted into applause. Some stood, clapping loudly, others wiped their eyes quietly. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. It was the most powerful reaction she had ever experienced. She realized then that her music could do more than entertain. It could connect, move, and inspire. After the event, people came to her with words of admiration, invitations to perform again, and offers to collaborate. She listened politely, grateful but cautious. She wasn't ready to leave her home, her quiet room, her piano that had been with her through everything. But she knew something important had changed. Her music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who heard it, everyone who felt it. She understood that this was just the beginning of a journey that could take her far beyond what she had imagined. That night, she returned home and sat at her piano, the city lights shining faintly through her window. She thought about the events, the people she had met, and the emotions she had shared. She realized that music had become a bridge, connecting hearts across spaces and lives. And though she was still quiet, still reserved, she felt a growing confidence. She had discovered not only the power of music but also her own strength, her ability to share something beautiful with the world. She played late into the night, letting her fingers explore melodies that had not yet been written, songs that had not yet been imagined. The piano sang, the room echoed, and she smiled softly. Her journey had begun, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she felt ready. She understood now that music was more than notes on a page. It was life itself in its purest, most honest form, and she was ready to let it guide her, wherever it might lead. The next morning, she woke up feeling a quiet excitement. Even though her day had started like any other, there was a subtle change in her world. She felt like the piano in her room was calling to her, not just to play the notes, but to explore new sounds, new feelings, new stories. She walked over and touched the keys, letting her fingers hover over them as if greeting an old friend. The room smelled faintly of wood and polish. The soft morning light coming through the window made the keys shine. She pressed a note, and it vibrated softly, filling the room. A small smile appeared on her face. Today, she thought, could be different. She spent the morning experimenting with melodies. Some were slow and tender, almost like a whisper, while others were lively and bright, dancing across the keys. Each time she discovered something new, she paused, listening, letting the sound linger. Music had become more than something she played. It was her language, her way to think and to feel. She realized that each song she created was a small piece of herself, something she could share without speaking. Later that day, she received another message from the event organizer. Another performance opportunity had arisen, this time at a small gathering hosted by a company known for supporting young talent. It was a bit unusual, they said, for a young girl to be invited, but they had heard her performance at the previous event and wanted her to play again. She read the message carefully, her heart beating faster. The idea of playing in front of a group she didn't know, in a place she had never been, was exciting and frightening at the same time. But she also knew that this was part of her path. She wrote back politely, confirming that she would attend. The next few days were filled with preparation. She played for hours each day, focusing not just on hitting the right notes, but on the feeling behind them. She experimented with the rhythm, the pace, and the dynamics, imagining how each note might touch someone listening. Sometimes she closed her eyes while playing, letting her hands move as though guided by memory and instinct. Other times, she would play while standing, shifting slightly as if she were telling a story with her whole body. Each session brought her closer to understanding the power of her music. On the day of the gathering, she arrived early. The room was smaller than the last event, but it had a warm atmosphere. There were tables set up with people seated and chatting quietly. She noticed that everyone seemed curious, some glancing toward the piano, others focusing on conversations, but occasionally looking toward the stage. She walked in quietly, carrying only her music sheet and her confidence. For a moment, she felt a twinge of nervousness, wondering if she would be able to reach these new listeners. But she reminded herself of all the times she had felt the music in her heart. That feeling was enough. When it was her turn to play, she approached the piano slowly, adjusting the bench carefully. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The room fell silent almost immediately, as if everyone sensed that something special was about to happen. She began with a simple melody, soft and tender, almost hesitant at first. But as she continued, the song grew, gaining confidence and richness. The notes floated across the room, filling it with warmth and emotion. People leaned forward, caught in the rhythm, letting the music take over their thoughts. She could see their reactions, subtle but meaningful. A man at the front adjusted his glasses, his eyes wide with focus. A woman at a nearby table had a hand over her heart, moved by the melody. Even a group of younger children, seated on the side, sat quietly, listening, their faces calm and fascinated. It amazed her that music could reach people in different ways, touching some with joy, others with reflection, and still others with memories or longing. She felt a connection with all of them, even though she didn't know their stories. After the performance, people came up to her. Many spoke warmly, expressing admiration for the depth and honesty in her playing. One man, older and distinguished, said, "I don't know how someone so young can create something so moving. It's as if you speak through the piano." She smiled, quietly accepting the praise. She didn't seek recognition, but she felt grateful that her music had reached someone's heart. That was the reason she played, after all. When she returned home that evening, she found herself reflecting on the journey she was beginning. She realized that the music had become a bridge, connecting her quiet, private world to the lives of others. She had always been introverted, careful with words, preferring the safety of silence. Yet through music, she could express herself completely, and others could understand her feelings without her needing to explain. That thought filled her with quiet satisfaction. Weeks passed quietly, but the days were full of music. She had developed a routine where she would wake early, play for a while before school, go to classes, and then spend the afternoons composing or practicing. Music had become her life in a way she had never imagined as a child. Each song she created carried a piece of her heart, a small story she wanted the world to hear. She had grown used to the attention her performances now brought, but she remained humble. The applause, the recognition, and even the invitations to perform were all secondary. What mattered most was the music itself, the feeling of her fingers moving over the keys and letting the sound flow into the room. One morning, she received an unexpected call. It was from a representative of a local television program. They had heard about her performances and wanted her to appear for a short segment, to play a piece live on air. The thought made her heart race. Television was different from anything she had experienced before. The lights, the cameras, the presence of strangers, it could be overwhelming. For a moment, she hesitated, thinking of the small private space of her room, the comfort of playing without anyone watching. But then she remembered the joy she had felt at the charity events, the professional gatherings, and the workshop. The feeling of sharing her music, of connecting with people who listened, outweighed her fear. She agreed to the interview and performance. In the days that followed, she prepared diligently. The television studio had requested that she play a short original piece, something that represented her style and emotion. She sat at her piano for hours, experimenting with melodies, listening to each note carefully, and imagining how it would sound in the studio. Each day, the song grew, becoming more confident, more expressive. She added small flourishes and pauses, letting the piece breathe and evolve. For her, it was not just a performance. It was a message, a piece of herself she wanted to share. The day of the recording arrived, and she entered the studio with a quiet determination. The place was bustling, full of crew members adjusting lights, cameras, and microphones. She felt a small pang of nervousness but reminded herself that the music had always been her strength. The piano was already set up, and she approached it, adjusting the bench and laying her hands on the keys. As she began to play, the studio faded away. The noise, the cameras, and the people became invisible. There was only the music, flowing through her, connecting her to the hearts of those who would eventually listen. Her fingers danced across the keys, each note deliberate, each chord filled with feeling. The melody was simple, yet profound, carrying warmth, joy, and a quiet sadness that made it feel human. People in the studio watched in silence, some moved, some wide-eyed, all captivated. The piece told a story without words, and when it ended, the room remained quiet for a moment, as if savoring the final note. Then, applause filled the space, and she felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the quiet satisfaction that came from sharing something deeply personal. After the recording, several producers approached her, expressing their admiration and suggesting ways she could continue performing on larger platforms. She listened politely, feeling a mix of excitement and caution. She didn't want to rush, but she realized that her music had the potential to reach far beyond her small room or her school. Each opportunity was a chance to connect, to touch lives, to share the emotions she carried inside. When she returned home, she sat at her piano and reflected on the past months. It had been a journey of quiet determination, practice, and growth. From the small living room where she had first discovered her love for music, to charity events, workshops, and now a television studio, she had traveled further than she ever expected. And yet, she still felt grounded. The piano remained her companion, her confidant, and her voice. Each day, as she played, she discovered new ways to express herself, new melodies that reflected her experiences and feelings. One afternoon, as she was practicing a new composition, a letter arrived from a prestigious music academy. They had heard about her performances and invited her to attend a summer program designed for young musicians with exceptional talent. It would be an intensive experience, with master classes, performance opportunities, and guidance from experienced instructors. She read the letter carefully, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It was an opportunity she could not ignore. She accepted immediately, knowing that this program could teach her skills and insights she had not yet imagined. The summer program was unlike anything she had experienced before. The instructors were not only skilled musicians but also patient mentors, encouraging creativity while teaching discipline and technique. She met students from all over the country, each with their own stories, styles, and passion for music. Some were confident, others shy, but all shared a common love for the art. The experience was challenging, sometimes exhausting, but also exhilarating. She learned new techniques, experimented with different instruments, and discovered how to communicate emotion through every aspect of her performance. During one workshop, she was asked to perform a piece she had composed herself in front of the group. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, aware of the eyes watching her closely. But as her fingers touched the keys, the music took over. The melody flowed naturally, each note carrying emotion, each chord telling a story. The room fell silent, everyone listening intently. When the piece ended, the applause was warm and heartfelt. One instructor said, "You have a rare ability to speak through music. Keep nurturing that gift." She felt a quiet pride, realizing that her dedication and love for music had allowed her to grow in ways she had never expected. As the summer program continued, she formed friendships with other students. They shared techniques, played duets, and encouraged one another to experiment with new sounds. She realized that music was not only about individual expression but also about connection and collaboration. Each practice session, each performance, became a shared experience, filled with learning, laughter, and support. She discovered that even in a competitive environment, music could bring people together, creating bonds that transcended words. By the end of the program, she had composed several new pieces, each reflecting her journey, her emotions, and her growing confidence. She performed them at a closing recital, a large event attended by instructors, students, and parents. The performance was heartfelt, capturing the attention of everyone in the room. People were moved by the honesty and depth of her music. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her dedication, patience, and love for the piano had allowed her to share something truly meaningful with others. Returning home after the program, she felt changed. She had grown not only as a musician but also as a person. She had learned the importance of patience, discipline, and self-expression. She had discovered that music could connect people, evoke emotions, and tell stories without a single word. Most importantly, she realized that her journey was just beginning. There was still so much to learn, explore, and create. Back in her room, she spent hours at the piano, experimenting with new ideas, refining her compositions, and imagining new melodies. Sometimes she would close her eyes, letting the music guide her fingers, allowing her emotions to flow freely. Other times, she would write down her compositions, carefully noting each detail, ensuring that the music captured exactly what she wanted to express. Each day was a new adventure, a chance to explore her creativity and deepen her connection with the piano. One evening, she received another invitation. A well-known musician had heard about her performances and wanted to meet her, discuss collaboration opportunities, and possibly record a duet. The thought was both exciting and intimidating. Collaborating with an established artist could be a significant step forward, but it also brought pressure. She spent the night thinking about the opportunity, weighing her feelings. In the end, she decided to accept. She realized that growth often came from challenges and stepping out of her comfort zone. The day of the meeting arrived. She met the musician at a small studio, a quiet place filled with instruments, sheet music, and warm light. The musician was kind, encouraging, and genuinely interested in her ideas. They discussed styles, shared melodies, and experimented with harmonies. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness, but as soon as she began to play, the anxiety faded. The music flowed naturally, a conversation between two artists, each expressing themselves while listening to the other. By the end of the session, they had created a short duet, a piece that was both simple and deeply expressive. Afterward, she walked home slowly, reflecting on the day. Collaborating had been a new experience, teaching her the importance of listening, adapting, and sharing ideas. She realized that music was not only about individual expression but also about connection, trust, and communication. Each note she played could interact with others, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. She felt grateful for the experience, excited for future opportunities to collaborate and grow. The following weeks were filled with a mix of practice, composition, and small performances. She continued to perform at local events, sharing her music with people who were moved by her melodies. She composed new pieces, exploring emotions she had not yet expressed. She experimented with tempo, rhythm, and style, finding new ways to communicate through sound. Each day was a journey, a chance to learn, grow, and connect. She realized that music had become more than a passion. It was a way of life, a path that guided her through challenges, joys, and discoveries. It taught her patience, courage, and empathy. It allowed her to express herself fully, connect with others, and share a part of her heart with the world. And she knew that this was only the beginning. Her journey would continue, filled with new melodies, performances, and experiences, each one shaping her into the musician and the person she was meant to become. The days after the duet session passed quietly, but they were filled with a sense of anticipation. She continued her routine of practice, composition, and reflection, but something felt different. She was no longer just playing for herself or small audiences. She felt a growing awareness that her music could reach far beyond the rooms she sat in. Each note had the power to move, to touch, and to tell a story. She knew that the responsibility of that power came with an equal sense of purpose, to create music that was honest, heartfelt, and meaningful. One morning, she received a message from the musician she had collaborated with. They had been invited to perform at a local cultural festival, a weekend-long event that would feature artists, musicians, and performers from all over the city. The invitation was unexpected, and she felt both excitement and nervousness. Performing at a festival would mean a larger audience, unfamiliar faces, and higher expectations. But she also understood that these challenges were part of growth. She agreed, eager to share her music on a bigger stage. The week leading up to the festival was filled with preparation. She practiced tirelessly, focusing not only on the duet but also on solo pieces she would perform. She experimented with new melodies, adjusted the tempo, and considered how each song might connect with the audience. Some evenings, she stayed late, playing softly as the city outside her window became quiet. She imagined the festival, the crowd, the anticipation in the air, and let it guide her fingers across the keys. Every session brought her closer to confidence and clarity. When the day of the festival arrived, she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. The venue was large, a bright open space with a stage, seating, and lights that glimmered above. She looked around, noticing other performers warming up, organizers checking equipment, and families finding their seats. The energy in the air was electric. She carried her music with care, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. But as she approached the piano, she reminded herself of all the hours she had spent preparing, all the songs she had created, and all the moments she had played for herself and others. That memory grounded her. Her first performance was solo. She took a deep breath, adjusted the bench, and began. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost like a whisper reaching out to the audience. But as she continued, the melody grew, rich with emotion and depth. She felt every chord, every pause, every note speaking not just to her but to everyone listening. People leaned forward, drawn into the music. Some had their eyes closed, lost in thought, while others watched intently, captivated. She could feel the connection forming, even from the stage. By the time she finished, the room was silent for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then applause erupted, filling the space with warmth and appreciation. She allowed herself a quiet smile, feeling a deep satisfaction. It was not about recognition or praise. It was about sharing her music, letting her story be heard, and knowing that it had reached someone else's heart. After her solo, she joined the musician for the duet. The energy shifted, blending two musical voices into one. Their notes intertwined, creating a melody that was both intricate and harmonious. She listened, adjusting her timing, her emphasis, and her touch to complement the other performer. The music spoke of collaboration, trust, and understanding, showing the audience how two individuals could create something greater together. People were captivated, leaning forward in their seats, some nodding to the rhythm, some closing their eyes to feel the emotion. When the last note faded, the applause was louder than before, standing and sincere. Backstage, she felt a rush of exhilaration. The performance had gone better than she imagined. The duet had created a connection, not only between her and the musician but also between her and the audience. People had listened, felt, and responded. She understood then that music was more than sound. It was a bridge between hearts, a shared experience that could evoke joy, sadness, hope, and reflection all at once. She realized that this was why she played: to connect, to express, and to share. In the days following the festival, opportunities began to appear in unexpected ways. Local community centers invited her to perform, small music programs wanted her to teach young students, and even a few online channels reached out to feature her music. She listened carefully, considering each opportunity with thought and care. She wanted to maintain her love for music, not let it become a source of stress or obligation. But she also understood that sharing her gift could inspire others and bring joy to many. She accepted the invitations selectively, focusing on experiences that felt meaningful. One afternoon, as she was practicing a new composition, she received a call from a distant relative. The relative had heard about her performances and wanted to meet her, curious about the young musician making waves locally. They invited her to a small gathering at their home, saying it would be an intimate audience, a chance for her to share her music in a more personal setting. She agreed, feeling a mix of curiosity and warmth. The idea of playing for family, for people who knew her story, felt special in a way that public performances could not replicate. When she arrived at the gathering, the room was modest, filled with familiar faces and warm smiles. Children, adults, and elders gathered, curious to hear her play. She sat at a small upright piano in the corner, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment before beginning. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost like a gentle greeting. As the melody developed, the room seemed to quiet naturally, people leaning in to listen. The music carried warmth, tenderness, and a quiet joy, and she felt deeply connected to each listener. By the time she finished, some had tears in their eyes, some were smiling softly, and all seemed moved. That evening, she returned home with a sense of fulfillment. Playing for people she knew, sharing her music with those who understood her heart, had reminded her of the true essence of why she played. Recognition, applause, and invitations were rewarding, but the most profound moments were when her music touched someone in a personal, intimate way. She sat at her piano, composing a new piece inspired by the evening, letting the experience guide her hands. Each note reflected the emotions she felt: gratitude, love, and a quiet happiness. Over the following weeks, she continued to expand her repertoire. She experimented with blending styles, exploring both classical and contemporary melodies. She composed original pieces that reflected her journey, her emotions, and her growth. Each day brought new ideas, challenges, and small discoveries. Sometimes she played late into the night, imagining her music reaching unknown listeners, each note carrying a message of hope and beauty. She understood that her journey with music was ongoing, a path with endless possibilities, and she embraced it fully. One afternoon, she received an unexpected invitation from a local business leader. He had heard her performance at the cultural festival and was deeply moved. He wanted to meet her personally and discuss a chance for her to perform at a significant company event. The idea of performing in front of influential people in a formal setting was intimidating, but also exciting. She considered it carefully and decided to accept. She understood that stepping into new environments, while challenging, was part of growth. The day of the company event arrived, and she entered the venue quietly. The hall was large, filled with polished surfaces, rows of chairs, and a stage set for performances. She carried her music carefully, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and anticipation. She approached the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. The audience fell silent, and for a moment, she took a deep breath, letting her heart steady. Then, as she began to play, the room faded. There was only the music, flowing through her, connecting her to everyone listening. Her performance was heartfelt, each note deliberate and full of emotion. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying feelings of hope, warmth, and reflection. She noticed subtle reactions in the audience: soft smiles, quiet nods, eyes closing to feel the music fully. By the end of the piece, a deep silence filled the room, followed by applause that seemed to linger, as if the audience did not want the moment to end. She felt a familiar warmth, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her music had touched others profoundly. Afterward, several people approached her, expressing admiration and gratitude. One man, a senior executive, said softly, "Your music moved me more than words ever could. Thank you for sharing this gift." She smiled quietly, humbled and grateful. She understood then that her music could reach anyone, regardless of background, status, or circumstance. It was a universal language, capable of touching hearts and creating connections. In the days that followed, she continued to play, compose, and explore. She collaborated with other musicians occasionally, attended small workshops to learn new techniques, and maintained her private moments at the piano. She realized that balance was essential. Sharing her music with the world brought joy and growth, but the quiet moments alone, experimenting and expressing herself, were just as vital. Each day, she discovered new possibilities, new melodies, and new ways to connect with others through her art. One evening, she sat at her piano, reflecting on the journey so far. From the small living room where she first fell in love with music, to charity events, workshops, television appearances, festivals, family gatherings, and professional performances, she had come a long way. And yet, she felt that the journey was only beginning. Each note she played carried her story, her growth, and her hope for the future. She knew that music would continue to guide her, teach her, and connect her to the world in ways she had never imagined. She began to play a new composition she had been developing, allowing it to flow naturally. The notes rose and fell, echoing through the quiet room, carrying emotion, storytelling, and life itself. She felt at peace, fulfilled, and eager for the next step in her journey. Music had become her voice, her companion, and her purpose, and she was ready to share it, one note at a time, with the world.